recording. Yes, we are. Yep. Thank you, Carrie. What's the name of the software again? It's Xcode. You can see it at the top left of the screen here. Yeah, so if you Google Xcode download, then that will show you a page to download the software. It's completely free. Don't need to log in or anything. Swift versus Objective-C, very good question. My answer is unless you've got a really good reason to go Objective-C, go Swift. So the advantage of Objective-C, which, if you don't know, is the older Apple language, which was used to build iOS and Mac apps, and is still very active today as well. The advantage of Objective-C is there's a lot more support for it online. It's a much older language, so there's a lot more information about it out there. It's also a lot more stable, whereas Swift tends to change quite regularly, which can be a frustration. The advantage of Swift, however, is that it's a much, much easier language to learn. So especially if you haven't done any coding before, then working with Swift is a lot easier than working with Objective-C. And we'll be using Swift today. So that's the shorthand version of it. Essentially, unless you've got a real good reason to go Objective-C, I would learn Swift. It's a lot easier and I think a lot more fun as well. Yes, the whole course is on just Swift. We don't look at Objective-C at all. I think there might be 1 or 2 points where we have to use Objective-C, but generally we're just using Swift here. Does Launchpad include Xcode? I don't know offhand. I don't think so. I think you need to download Xcode independently of Launchpad, but I haven't used Launchpad, so I don't know. Best way to get Xcode is just to Google download Xcode, go to Apple's website and download it from there. And we're not using core data. No, core data is a way of storing data on the iPhone app, similar to a database. And we're not doing that in this app. I do cover it in the course, so if you want to use it later on, you can watch that video to see how to, but we're not going to be using that here. So no, don't tick that box. And I wouldn't recommend the Xcode beta. No, it's probably fine. It won't cause you any major problems, but we're not going to be using any beta features. So if you download the beta, then that just makes it more likely that you're going to have issues with crashing or strange behavior. So no, go for the latest stable version, which is 7.2, I think. All right. Okay, so here we are. I've opened my project in Xcode, and you can see it's not a particularly friendly screen. There's a lot going on here, so I want to break this down and make sure that you're paying attention to things that you should be, and that you're not worrying about all this information that really you're not particularly interested in. So first off, we've got this top bar at the top of the screen, which is reasonably obvious to see what's going on. We've got a play button, which allows us to play our app on the current simulator, which I'll show you a little bit later on. We've got a stop button, which we can stop it running on that simulator. And then we can actually choose what device we want to simulate. So I find the iPhone 6s is a good device. The iPhone 6s Plus is a bit too big on my monitor, so I'm going to pick iPhone 6s, and I suggest you do the same as well. But let's not run the app quite yet. We'll see. We'll put a couple of other things first before we run it. But that is a great thing about Xcode, that you can run your app and see how it works completely on your computer. You don't actually need an iPhone to develop iPhone apps at all. Then we've got the title and date up there, pretty self-explanatory. Now, these buttons here, I'm going to show you a little bit later on. The assistant editor will bring in when we're writing a little bit of code. And we're not doing any version control here, so we don't need the version editor. But these ones are really handy. So they just allow you to switch off the various bars in the main section of the screen here. So if I click that one, it makes the left bar go away. There's a bottom bar as well, which I can bring in or make go away using the middle button, and the right bar as well. I can bring in or make go away with that. So I'll be doing that regularly just to keep my screen nice and tidy, getting rid of bits of the screen that we don't need. And you'll find that when you're writing code, for example, you probably don't want either of those bits. They're distracting you. You just want your main central part. But when you're dragging and dropping, it is very useful to have different areas live at the same time. So I definitely recommend using those buttons a lot. Then on the left, we've got our file editor here. So this is actually lots of different things. We're not going to be using any of these sections, so don't worry about those. We're going to be focusing completely on the file structure. So these are the files that make up your app. We're going to be focusing on two of these, which are viewcontroller.swift. I'll just click on that briefly, and you'll see viewcontroller.swift appears in the middle. So that's some Swift code. Don't worry about what it means. We'll cover that later on. And this is the main chunk of code that will run when your app runs. And then the other file we're going to be looking at is main storyboard. And this is a kind of drag and drop interface where we can actually create the layout of our app and add images, text, etc., right here in a drag and drop interface. We don't have to code those. The other ones, this assets is where you can put things like images or sounds. The launch screen is obviously the launch screen for your app, so you can put some images or whatever you want in there. Info.plist is just some info about your app, like the app name, versions, etc. And then appdelegates.swift is some methods, that is some bits of code essentially that will run at various points in your app. But editing that is higher level that we're going to be looking at here. So the two that we're going to be focusing on are main storyboard and viewcontroller.swift. Right, I've spoken for a little bit now, so I'm just going to go back and see if we've got any more questions. No more questions? Excellent. Hopefully that means that all is clear. Okay, can I repeat what I said about app delegates? Sure. Essentially, you don't need to worry about appdelegate.swift at the moment. It's a collection of functions, so chunks of code that are called at various points in your app. So application did enter background, for example. That method, that chunk of code, will be called when your application goes into the background. So if you want to do something when your application goes into the background, then you would put that code there. Similarly, when the application enters the foreground, you might want to do something, etc. And there's a lot more that we can put into appdelegate.swift, but it's beyond what we're going to be talking about today. I hope that answers your question. Xcode doesn't work on Windows, I'm afraid. It only works on Mac. So you're going to need to get a Mac if you want to make iPhone apps. And we've got, you are blanking out. I don't know quite what that means. I hope that means... I think speakerphone is picking up feedback. Can you hear me okay? Sorry about this. Okay, most people are saying that seems to be fine. Great, okay. Xcode doesn't work on an iPad, I'm afraid. You can only do it on OS 10. So you really do need a Mac. iPhone, iPad, no good. Mac is the only platform that you can run Xcode on. All right, great. Glad we're back in business. So now over to our main section. So you can see when I clicked on the different files, they all appeared in the center there. So the central window is where we're going to be spending most of our time. It's where we do our coding, and it's where we drag and drop our items for our app layout, etc. So that's where we get most of the work done that we want to achieve. It also, if we go back to where we were at the start, at the top, is where we can view various things about our app. So the version of iOS that we're deploying, device orientations that we're supporting, etc. You can have a look down there if you want a bit more detail, but essentially those are the details of our app. And finally, on the right, we've got a context menu. So this will change depending on what you've got active in the main window. So at the moment, it's showing us some general information about our app because we're in that window. So we can see the app name there and various bits of information that we're not particularly interested in. So location, full path, etc., organization. So we can edit those there if we like. If we change to a different file, you can see that we get a new set of information. And if I change to main storyboard, for example, we get information about main storyboard. So essentially the right menu is a context menu, which will change depending on what you've got live at any given time. And that's about it. So that's a simplified explanation of the Xcode interface, and we are now in a position to go and make something. So I'm just going to take a couple more questions if there are any. Nope, we're all good. Okay. Great. So let's try and actually get something on our app so that we can run it. So click Main Storyboard and try and get the view controller nice and big. You can pinch to zoom on your Mac, keep touchpad, and that will change the size, and you want it basically as big as possible. So remember I said at the beginning, a view was like a screen or a page in your app. So a single view might have a list of contacts if it was an email app, or it might be a view that shows the contents of a particular email or something like that. So a complex app might have several different views, but our app that we're creating just has a single view. I'll remind you what we're going for. We're going for something like this. So it just has a single view and a single page. So the view controller is fairly self-explanatory. It controls the view. So here we can drag and drop items into our view and display them on the iPhone screen. So let's drag and drop something, and we'll start. If you can't see these options at the bottom right there, then click on the circle with the square in, and that shows the object library. So without any search, you can have a quick scroll down there, and these are all the different sorts of UI elements, so user interface elements, that we can drag onto our app. And feel free to experiment with them if I start boring you. These are the ones you're probably going to be familiar with, so labels, buttons, controls, text fields, etc., etc. And if you want to access something really quickly, then you just type it in the filter there and it'll show. So I'm going to start with a label, which is a basic way of getting some text onto your app. So you click on label and then you drag right into your app like that. Doesn't matter where you put it for now. So just drag it on there, and now you've got a label in your app which has the word label. That's not very exciting. So I'm going to double click that in order to change the text, and I'm going to change it to the classic programmers hello world. So now I've dragged a label onto my app and I've changed the text to hello world. So if I run my app, I should actually be able to see the text hello world on it. So just before I run it, I need to stop the other one from running because I can't run two at once. You won't need to do that, but I'm just going to stop that and then run the app. And you can see it takes a little while, but it will compile the app and then it will run it in the simulator. So then I'm going to Alt-Tab and go over to the simulator, which is seen as a separate app on your Mac. And you can see the simulator is loading now. With any luck, my app will pop up, and there you go. So now I've got the text that I've added to my label, and it's displaying on my app. So if you manage to achieve that as well, then well done. That's your first iPhone app created already. It doesn't do a lot, but it's the first step of 1,000 miles, as they say. So I'm going to go back and customize that, but let me have a quick look and see if there are any questions about that. Nope, I don't think so. Great. Okay. Hope this is going well for you. So now we've got our bit of text here. Let's see if we can customize it a little bit. So if you go over to the context menu on the right and click on the fourth icon along, it's called the Attributes Inspector. I don't quite know what it's supposed to be. A label, perhaps? I'm not sure. But that's the one that allows you to change the attributes of any particular element. So in this case, we've got a label, which is some text. And here you can really go crazy. So you can change the color. So I've just clicked on color there, and I can choose, got from grayscale to bright colors. And then if we go for colors, then we can just drag it around and pick any color we like. So sort of blue there. I can also use the dropper tool to pick any color on the screen. So if I wanted it to be the same color as my blue background at the top there, I can select that and then we've got Hello World in that nice kind of faded blue. And there's a bunch of other ways that you can choose colors as well. If you're a web developer, then you may recognize the hex color symbol. And we've got various basic colors to choose from, spectrum, or a selection of crayons there. I'm going to go for plum, I think. So you can change the color, you can change the font size. Let me just get that moved over a little bit for you. So clicking up or down is going to make this bigger and smaller. What it doesn't do is make the label container bigger or smaller. So I'm going to make the container nice and big so it can contain my text as big as I want it to. Okay. So that changes the size. We can also change the font itself. If you click on the T there, then you can change the font in the drop down at the top. And there's a few standard fonts there, but if you want to go for a specific font, then click Custom, and then you can pick any one of the many fonts that are available to you within Xcode. So you can just try a few out. There's Futura, Khaleesi, Ping Fang, all sorts. Let's see if I can find something vaguely exciting. Papyrus, I like that one. Okay, you get the idea. And you can change the style and the size there as well. Then we can change the alignment. That's pretty obvious. So we can center it within our box. We can left align, we can right align, we can justify it. We can change the number of lines. We can change whether it's highlighted and enabled. I would leave those as the defaults. And then these are slightly more advanced options, so I won't go into those right now, but feel free to fiddle with them and have a play if you want. And then we can change the highlighted color, the shadow color if you want, and the shadow offset. So if you really want to have a bit of shadowing, then let's see what that looks like. There you go. And you can change the offset so it looks really quite deeply unpleasant. Something like that. Okay, so let's just get rid of our shadow, but if you want to keep yours in, then feel free. And then I'm not going to change any of these view settings at the top there, but I will just show you the alpha setting, which is quite useful, which basically allows you to pick a number between 0 and 1 that shows how transparent the label is. And that works for any element, it doesn't have to be text. So if you go all the way down to 0, it will be completely invisible. All the way up to 1, it's completely opaque. And then somewhere in between, it's a little bit unclear. So that can be a really nice way of making your apps look pretty, basically. And a bit of stretching and other options there that I don't think we need to go into. All right, so that's a text label. If you might be wondering how we center that label in our screen. Now, centering it on a number of different devices is quite tricky, and I show you that in the course, but we're not going to cover that now. But if you want to center it for a specific device, that's quite easy. And what you can do is click on the yellow circle at the top to select the view controller, and then you can change the size of the view controller to be the same as the size of the phone that you're working with. So the iPhone 6s is 4.7 inch. So if I select 4.7 inch, now the view controller here is the same size as the iPhone 6s. So if I now take my Hello World label and drag it around, you can see these blue dotted lines appear, and that enables me to center it horizontally and, if I want, vertically as well. And then if I center it within the label, it will be completely centered. So if we just have a quick look at that, if I run that in the iPhone 6s, it'll be centered horizontally and vertically. There it is, beautiful. If I run it in the iPhone 6s Plus, though, it won't be centered horizontally and vertically. Let me just show you that quickly. Essentially, it will be the same distance from the left of the screen and the top of the screen, which means because the screen is bigger, it won't be centered. So there are more advanced ways to center it for multiple screen sizes and orientations. You can see there, it's not in the middle. Sadly, reasonably close, but it's not. But there's something called auto layout in Xcode, which allows you to center this on any device orientation or size. And I'd recommend using that, but we'll cover that later in the course. All right, let's have a quick look, see if there are any questions before we move on. Okay, so someone tried it and the text was off screen, only showed when I rotated the simulator. Probably you need to drag your text towards the top left. So the top left here is the top left of the screen on your device, whichever device you're looking at. So if you drag it towards the top left, then it will definitely display. If we have a look now, it will display on the top left of my iPhone 6 Plus, 6S Plus. There you go. So if it's appearing off to the right, then you've dragged it too far to the right. So just drag it over to the left. What's the other one? Oh, never mind, my Mac was too small. Right, there you go. That's the problem then. Okay. So that's labels. I'm going to give you a quick challenge then. Can you add a second label, which just has some normal text underneath this first one? I'll give you a moment just to try that out if you can. All right, hope you managed it. Hopefully you just found label in the object library, then dragged it in. You could center it and then stretch it out nicely. And then we'll just add some random text. This is some more text in a label. That'll do, and I'll center that there. All right, you with me so far? Any questions? Drag to the top left and the label overlaid. Yes, absolutely. Yes, thanks for pointing that out. If you go too high up, then you have indeed got a full screen here. So if you go completely to the top, that will overlap the Wi-Fi signal there. So yeah, definitely you'll see that if you drag it down, when you drag it down again, it will hit a marker, and that's the marker you want to go for to make sure that you're not overwriting anything at the top of the screen. All right, so now let's add a few more object types. So I'm going to next go for buttons. So buttons, of course, allow you to have a little bit of interaction in your app. So with labels, you can't, the user can't interact with them in any way, but with buttons they can. So the default button on iOS doesn't look a great deal like a button. It's just some blue text, but that's what it is. You can change the text in exactly the same way as you can with a label. And then if we go back to our iPhone 6S and have a look at it, we will get a very small amount of interaction with this button. And essentially what will happen is when we click the button, it'll give you the kind of click animation that you get on iOS. There you go. So hopefully you can see that all right in the webinar here. Obviously that doesn't do anything yet, and later on we'll see how we can actually make something happen when we click the button. But for now we've just got a very small bit of interaction there. When I select the button, there's a bunch of options here, exactly the same as with labels, so you can change the font size, color, shadow color. You can replace the text with an image if you want, or you can put a background image on there, and you can do some various aligning techniques as well and change the alpha if you want it to be not completely opaque. But we've already gone through those once. Feel free to change your button layout and style if you like, but we'll leave it at that. Okay, so there's our button. The next one I'm going to look at is a text field. So this is actually a way for the user to enter data into their app. And by default, they look pretty nice. They've got some nice styling. Again, you can change the color, font, alignment. The placeholder text is quite nice. So if I put enter some text in there, then that will display that quite faintly. And then when I click in the box or tap in the box, then the placeholder text disappears, so I can then just start writing whatever it is I want to put in there. So if I click in there, you can see we get this interaction already, and I can start typing in the box. Worth noting as well that while you're developing your app, you might not want to have to click there to enter your email address to log in every time. And there's a nice quick way to do that. If you go to hardware inside the simulator and then go to keyboard and toggle software keyboard, then the software keyboard goes away and you can use your hardware keyboard. So this is much easier to type. So I'd recommend while you're developing to have that option going, and it just saves time so you don't have to tap away on the software keyboard. But that's up to you. All right, so that's inputs. Any questions at this point? What about background colors? Is that background colors in buttons? I presume so. I mean, all of this is worth just giving it a try and seeing what happens. So there's background colors here. So the default is clear, but if I change it to green, we get a background color of green. And I can use all the same color techniques as I showed you earlier to get purple, etc. So let's have a nice pink thing there. And similarly, if you were asking about buttons, then we've got a background color, background image there, and further down is background color. So once again, we can choose whatever background color we want for that button if we want to. All right. Does that answer your question, Shane? I hope so. What is the object name? It would be really good if you could ask really clear questions. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by what is the object name. Are you perhaps talking about this particular user interface element? If so, it's a text field. So this is a text field, this is a button, and these two are labels. So the text field there. My view is bigger than the simulator. How do I set the view to be a certain device size? I did mention this earlier, but I'll show you again. If you go to the yellow circle at the top, view controller, and then go over to the context menu on the right, and then in size, select iPhone 4.7 inch, then that will get you a storyboard, which is the same size as the iPhone 6S. Okay, I think there was a couple of other questions there. What about the background for the entire screen? Oh, good question. We can't, let me think how you would change that. You would probably change that by dragging in an image, which I'll show you later on. You can't just simply change the background without putting some object there to change the background there isn't any element to get in the view itself. But you could drag an image in, and we'll see how to do that in a moment. Okay. Text field question mark. I don't quite know what that means. The text field object name, as I said, yeah, is indeed text field. That's the object name. Okay. How to create a login database. Thanks for the question, Mohanad. That's something that's rather beyond what we're going to look at here, I'm afraid. That is covered in the course, but it's a rather more advanced topic, and it depends what kind of database you want, and that's not something we're going to be looking at now. So please do have a look at the course. It's all in there, but that's rather beyond what we're looking at now. Probably core data is the best place to start for that. All right, so feel free to experiment with all these other types. So we've got sliders here, and they all work by default as well, which is nice. So as soon as you drag them in, then they become active and you can work with them in the way that you'd normally expect. You've got switches, a little activity indicator there, a progress view, and various other things. So the last one I really want to show you is an image view. So this obviously allows you to have an image in your app. So You just drag it in like that, like you would any other view. And by the way, a view is not just used to refer to the view on your page, which is the page in the app, but also any one of these is also a view. So the page itself is a view, the image view is a view, the slider is a view, and all of these are views. So view is a general word to refer to essentially something that you can see on the screen, a user interface element. So how do we get an image to appear in this image view? Well, if you click on it, you can see up here we've got image and then a drop-down box, but we haven't got any images there, so we have to bring one into our app. So let's find an image. I always like to start with Homer Simpson. So I just went to images.google.com and then searched for Homer Simpson. And I'm going to click on that first image there, and there he is. And then I'm going to control click and save image as. And that will allow me to save the image on my computer, and then I can import it into my app. So control click on the image and then save image as. And I'm just going to save it right there on the desktop. There we go, and now it's saved. If you've got another image you want to use, you don't have to download one from the web. You can get any image from anywhere, but that will work fine. So now we've got our image. How do we get it into our app? Well, we go over to Finder. Just shut down the windows I don't need. So Finder is our kind of file explorer. And so on my desktop there, I'll just make that a little bit smaller. You can see the Homer Simpson image that we just downloaded. So all I'm going to do is just drag it into my app. And it doesn't matter where you put it. I'm just going to put it right there under main storyboard. And when I let go of the drag, then this dialog box comes up. I recommend copy items if needed. That will create a copy of the image within the app file structure itself. And that's generally a good idea, so that if you delete the original, it doesn't affect your app. And create groups is a good default to leave it on as well. And definitely add to targets. So leave that more or less as is. And then you can see we've got the image there, and there it is, charming as ever. And now if we click on the image view and we click on the down arrow, then we can select that image. And there he is. Great. That was a slightly lengthy process, so I'm just going to check to see if we've got any questions about that. Is there a control key to stretch objects in both directions during drag? I don't quite know what that means. If you want to stretch an object in both directions, then you would select, hover the mouse over the corner, and then just drag it around and stretch it like that. Limits on image size? I don't believe so. I don't think there's a specific file limit, but you should definitely keep your image sizes only as big as they need to be. I wouldn't put a massive image in there. I think I have crashed Xcode by putting a 20 meg image or something like that in there. So you definitely wouldn't want anything beyond about 2 megs. And even that would almost certainly be hugely unnecessary. So try and make them as small as they can possibly be, and that will just make your app more efficient and less likely to be rejected by Apple as well. So there's no fixed limits, but just try and make them as small as necessary. Okay. So there's a few things that we can do with images. The mainly useful one is the mode here. So obviously my image is stretched out at the moment to the edges of my image view, which is not necessarily what I want. It doesn't look great when it's stretched out like that. So a nice solution to that is aspect fit. And aspect fit, in fact, is probably going to be the mode that you're going to want most often with your images, and that essentially will take the longest side of the image and fit that in, and then scale the image appropriately. So we can drag things around, but whatever size we make it, he will be appropriately sized, so he doesn't look stretched out. So there's a couple of others. Aspect fill does the same thing, but with the shortest side. Generally, that's not particularly useful. And then you can center it and do various other things. Right align it, they don't change very much. But really, the main ones you're going to want are scale to fill and, most commonly, aspect fit. Okay, so there's your image, and we've got all the usual options. So I can add a background color. This was a transparent image, so that means I can change the background color of it. If it wasn't transparent, then changing the background wouldn't make any difference. As before, I can change the alpha and kind of fade the image out. In fact, you can see that better if I drag the image over everything else. Then you can see how this alpha works. So with an alpha of 1, then Homer is very visible. As we reduce it, the things behind him become more visible. You get the idea. Okay, and let's just have a quick look then and see what this looks like. It should look pretty much identical on our iPhone screen. There we go. So we've got there, in terms of user interface elements, we've got pretty much everything that you'd need in a basic app. We've got some text, we've got a button, we've got a text field to put some data into, we've got a slider, and we've got an image. So in terms of layout, that's what you need for a basic app. What we want to look at next then is a little bit of interaction. So how do we make it so that something happens when the user clicks on that button? That's the key. That's the mystery, and that's what we're going to look at next. Just before we do, I will answer any more questions. Are there any ways to send the image behind the other objects? Very good question. Thank you, Minu. Good, great question. And yes, there are. I will show you how. So by default, the later you add an object to your app, the more towards the front it's going to be. So the slider goes in front of the text field goes in front of the button, etc., etc. If you want to change that, then you click on this little icon down here, the square with the line on it, which is the document outline. There we go. So this shows you how what elements make up your page. And actually, just out of interest, aha, yes. So I'm going to change my answer to the question of how do you make the background a certain color. And if we click on view here, then that selects the view, the main view of the page, which is, remember, the whole page. And we can actually change the background right here. There we go. So apologies, I said the wrong thing earlier. I didn't think we could change the background without adding an extra element, but we can. Bringing in the document view and then clicking view and then just changing the background of the view right there. So let's go back to default. So the question was, how can we change which ones appear in front of others? So let's say we want Homer to be the background of our app rather than the front. All we would do is drag Homer to the top of this list. And now Homer is in the back. So essentially the list works from top to bottom, back to front. So if we want Homer in the front, then we drag him back down to the bottom. If we put him in the middle somewhere, then he'll be in front of the top 3 elements, but behind the other 2. I hope that answers your question, Minu. Thank you very much for asking it. That's a great thing to be able to do. How do we crop an image? I wouldn't recommend cropping within Xcode. I would definitely recommend cropping your image in a separate app and then bringing it in. Having said that, I'm not sure if it's even possible to do it here. We may be able to use an image mask or something like that. Let's see what happens if we... No, I don't think any of those work. Obviously, aspect fill crops it to some extent, but that's only in a pretty specific way. So no, I'd recommend cropping your images separately, and I would do that on a Mac just by double clicking on them, and that will open them up in preview, and then you can crop them really easily from preview. Just select the area that you want to crop and then go to Tools and Crop. There you go. So definitely better to do that than within Xcode. I don't know offhand whether you can do it in Xcode at all. There's possibly a way, but I think you'll probably need to write some code to do that. Okay, any other questions? Okay, you're welcome, Mohammed. Glad that helped. Right, so now we're getting on to the really good stuff. We've made our app. We've got a lovely bit of layout here, and we want something to happen when we click that button. So now we're going to get rid of the bits of the page we don't need. So I'm going to get rid of that right bar, and I'm going to click on the assistant editor. So the two circles there. And what this does is it gives us, I'll just get rid of the document view there. It gives us two central panes essentially side by side. So this is particularly useful when we're coding because we can look at the lookout of the app and at the same time look at the code of the app. So this is the code and this is the layout of our app. So before I explain what this code is, I'm just going to get a little bit of interaction from this button so that you can get a bit of context. It won't probably make sense the first time, but don't worry, we'll do it several times, and by the end you should be pretty clear on how it works. So if I want something to happen when I click this button, I hold down the Control key and I drag from the button into my viewcontroller.swift file. And it is important where you drag it to. It has to go just underneath where it says class view controller, but on top of override func view did load. So, and then you let go, and we've got the option to create a connection. And we want to create an action. I'll talk about outlets a little bit more later on, but we want to create an action because we want something to happen. So we want something to happen when this button is clicked. So we select an action, and we're going to create an action associated with this button. And we can call this action whatever we like. I'm going to call it button clicked, like that. And you'll notice the capitalization there. If you haven't done any coding before, that might look a bit strange, but this is how we generally write our functions. So we use lowercase for everything apart from the first letters of the second and any future words. And that just means that it doesn't have any hyphens or spaces or anything nasty, but it is reasonably readable. So you start with the lowercase and then you just use capitals for each word apart from the first one. So I do the same thing, but it really doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it anything you like. And we'll leave the type as it is. Any object, we don't need to go into the details of those. The event is reasonably interesting. So there's lots of things that you could do with a button. So someone could touch down on the button. They could cancel their touch. They could touch down repeatedly. They could touch, drag, and then enter the button. They could touch, drag, and exit the button. So all of these things could happen. And if you change the event then you're changing, obviously, the event that will cause your code to run. But touch up inside is the standard event for basically pressing the button. So the user has pressed down on the button and then they've just touched up, i.e. they've taken their finger off the screen. And then we don't need any arguments there, so just put sender in. In fact, we could put none there, but I'll keep it as the default sender. Right, and then we click connect, and this will then create some code for us which connects this button. So I'll just briefly talk through what this code means. So an IB action is, I forget what IB stands for, but it's essentially an action. This is saying we're creating an action which is going to happen when our button is clicked. And then we're defining a function associated with that action. A function is just a bunch of code, basically. So we want something to happen when that button is clicked, and we're defining that function now. Then we've got the function name, which is button clicked, which I defined earlier. And then we've got one attribute that the function has, and that's the sender. So the sender has a type of any object, and essentially the sender is the button itself. So I'm not going to be using that at all, so don't worry about it too much, but just to clarify what that means, we're creating a variable called sender, which has a type of any object, and that will be a way of referring to the button itself if we want to, but we're not going to be doing that, so don't worry too much about that at this point. Right, then we've got those curly brackets. Curly brackets are just what we use in Swift, which is the language that we're using here, and a number of other languages as well, to contain code. So whatever code we write in here is going to happen when that button is pressed. So I'm going to create something really simple. I'm going to use the print command, and I'm going to type button was pressed. So that's our first bit of Swift that we're typing here. Print prints some text to the console. You'll remember that at the beginning of the webinar, I brought in the bit at the bottom there. This bit here on the right is the console, and that is where we can print things, and it's a really useful thing to use as you're developing your app if you want to know what the value of a variable is at any given time, or just give yourself messages or debug your code. Then you can print things to the logs, and it doesn't affect your actual app at all, but it does mean that you can see a little bit of what's going on. And then to make it clear what was printed, we use parentheses to contain that, and then this in red here is what's known as a string encoding. So we've got double quotes, and that can basically just contains the text that we want to print. So that's it. Let's run that and have a look. With any luck, that will all work, and then when I click my button, I will get the text button was pressed appearing in the console. Let's have a look. Oh, it looks beautiful. There we go. So can you see that? Button is pressed, appear down there. Of course, I can make it do it again and again if I want to. So that's pretty basic, but it's also pretty exciting. We've got some actual interaction with our user here. And there's only a small gap from there to starting making apps which actually interact on the iPhone screen itself. So there we did quite a lot there. Let me see if we've got some questions. Smiley face. Now you've just got to help figure out and create a database for members to sign in. Mohammed, I'm afraid we're not going to cover that in this webinar. I'm very sorry, but that is a pretty advanced thing to be able to do. You will be able to do it in the course, but not in this webinar. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. IB is short for Interface Builder. Thank you very much. And how did you open the panel on the right, says Craig? Just by... Do you mean this panel? I closed that panel. Ah, you mean this panel here. I used the assistant editor. So those two circles at the top there, if you click them, then it will go away. Selecting the down arrow, which is annoying. But if you click those two circles, then it'll go away. And if you click them again, then it'll come back. All right, we're almost out of time here. I want to make sure I answer everyone's questions. So how do you link the click to another page? Mohammed, I love your advanced questions, but again, that's not something we're going to be able to cover in this webinar. What I will show you very quickly, we've got 5 minutes left, I'm going to show you how we can change the text of a label when that button is pressed. So instead of just printing something to the console, we'll actually update something on the user interface. So I'm going to hurry through this a little bit. I'm going to control drag again from Hello World into the same place, so just underneath where it says Class View Controller. And this time I'm going to create an outlet. In fact, I don't have the option for an action this time because this is not a button. So I'm going to create an outlet. And an outlet is just something for me to refer to this label with. And that will become clear in a minute. So I'm going to call it Hello World label. I'm going to leave everything else as the default and then connect that. And then this creates another IB outlet, or sorry, an IB outlet. With this one was an IB action. So an interface builder outlet, and we're creating a variable this time, not a function. And this variable is called Hello World label, and it's a UI label. It has a type of UI label. Ignore the exclamation mark for the moment. We'll talk about that in the next webinar. And then if I want to update the text within Hello World label when the button is pressed, then I type Hello World label, and you can see Xcode very conveniently auto predicts that for me. And then I can use dot text, and that gets the text of the Hello World label. And I can then set that to whatever I want by saying equals, and then whatever I want it to equal to in quotes. So I'm going to change it to Hello Rob. Simple as that. So what I've done is I've created a variable called Hello World label, which refers to this label over here, the purple one that says Hello World. And then when the button is pressed, not only do we print to the logs, but we also change the text of Hello World label to Hello Rob. Let's take a look. So this is as far as we're going to go in this webinar. It's actually slightly further than I thought we'd get, so that's great. What we'll do at the beginning of the next webinar, let's just check and make sure that that works. Hurrah! So we've actually updated the user interface on the app itself, as well as sent something to the logs when the button is pressed. So we'll start the next webinar exactly where we've left off, so right here, and we will look in more detail about what's going on here. What is UIKit? What does class view controller mean? A view did load and all of that stuff. And then we'll go through the process of making our cat years app. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that made sense, and I hope that's hopefully inspired you to look at the course and to see, learn a little bit more about how to make iOS apps. Any more questions? So the reason we had to create a variable for the Hello World label is in case we wanted to manipulate the text. Exactly. If we didn't want to manipulate the text, would we still need to link it to an outlet? No, not at all. The only reason we created the outlet was so that we could manipulate it in some way. So if I never planned to change or do anything with this text, I would never create an outlet for it. You only need to create outlets for ones that you want to edit in some way. Similarly with actions. How to replay webinar? That's a very good question. I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I am recording it, so it will get saved on GoToWebinar. You'll probably get a link sent to you automatically, but if you don't, I'll make sure that you get sent one. Carrie, thank you very much. So Carrie's just told me that he will send you the link once I've sent it to him. Brilliant. So I'll be around for another few minutes. If you want to ask me any questions, then please do. Oh, we've got a couple more there. Would we be able to change the format of the text if we wanted, such as changing the color? Absolutely. Let me see. I think that's almost easy. No, it's not that easy. No. Okay, I'll show you how to change the color of the text at the beginning of the next webinar. In fact, I'll give myself a little message. But yeah, you can absolutely change absolutely anything you want there. Brilliant. Lots of thank yous. Great. I hope you enjoyed it. So I'll hang out here for a little bit and ask any other questions. Otherwise, I'll see you whenever it is. I think this time next week for part 2, in which we'll be completing our Cat Years app. Thanks. It's been great. Hope you've enjoyed it. And if you've got any more questions, do let me know. Carrie's just asked, we can download your free ebook from the course. Yep, absolutely. So once you've signed up from the course, just watch the first video and that will give you all the instructions that you need to get the free ebook. There's free assets as well, free web hosting, loads of cool free stuff. And it's all explained how you get it in the course itself. Thanks, Joe. I look forward to seeing you in the discussions. I'm there all the time, and I'm sure I'll meet you there. Brilliant. Thanks, Carrie. That's great. All right, I think that's all the questions. Feel free to email me. I'm sure Carrie can pass on my email address if you need anything else. But otherwise, hope you had a good time. I definitely did, and I will see you all next week. Goodbye.